Well, I was actually teaching at Quantico. I was teaching Train the Trainer. We were trying to kind of force multiply so we can get more people in the FBI to go out and train on sex crimes and stuff. And my sister paged me in the middle of this class a number of times, and then she literally paged me 911. And I was like, what's going on? And so I gave the class a break. I went to the video room, and I called her. And as I'm calling her, I look at, there's a monitor, and it's showing the World Trade Center on fire. And I was like, why are they showing 1993? What's going on? But I'm calling my sister, and I'm just seeing that. And when she gets on the phone, she's like, Jimmy, a plane hit the World Trade Center. Her husband is also Jim. And she said he was working across the street at One Financial Plaza. He was knocked out of his chair when it happened. That's how big the explosion was. And, what's going on? And I was like, I don't know. And I'm looking, and then the second plane hits. And I said, oh, this is an attack. But I knew that all the bomb techs are in the classroom next to me. They're here for an in-service. So I ran over there, knocked on the door, burst into the class, and everyone's like, what are you doing? And I said, we're under attack. Both World Trade Centers have been hit by jumbo jets. Because they were saying, a private plane just hit the second tower. I'm like, a private plane? The wings are as long as the side of that building. That's 200 feet long. And they all thought this was some kind of exercise as part of class. I said, no, I'm telling you, they're both burning. And then all their pages started going off. So what happened, though, was one active FBI agent who got killed that day, Lenny Hatton. He was the bomb tech who stayed behind in New York in case something happened. All the other bomb techs were in that room. Every one of them would have been at the site except for this class.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this. How's CrimeCon been for you?
Pretty good. It's busy. There's 5,000 people there. And, I hosted the first 2 years. So everybody's like, oh, my God, you're back. So I get kind of crowded by people. And I'm a little averse to crowds today because of COVID and my underlying condition. So I am, it's a little nerve-wracking, but it's also fun. And, I've also met people. One of the things that I've done each time at CrimeCon is look for people who are trying to solve crimes of their loved ones. And I've met a couple of people who I really want to pursue their cases, because there's something, not everybody gets equal justice.
Right. So going backwards, tell me about growing up. Where is hometown for you?
Well, it's interesting because I was actually born in San Mateo, California. My parents were both New Yorkers, but they were in California and visiting relatives of my dad. They got into a car accident on the Golden Gate Bridge, and my mother was hospitalized, and I popped out 2 months early. So I was born in California, and then they didn't go back to New York till I was 3, I think. And then we lived in the city and in Queens, and then we actually moved to upstate New York, which is actually downstate New York to anybody who actually lived in upstate New York. But we were in Muncie and then Warwick, small towns north of the city. And then, as soon as I turned 17, I went back to the city. I lived in the Bronx and Manhattan for the next 17 years. And then, got into the FBI and sort of that changed everything. I went from the New York office to Little Rock office to Washington Field office to where I stayed for the last 12 years of my career, which was the Critical Incident Response Group, which is in Quantico, Virginia, and that's the entity that houses the Behavioral Analysis Unit, where the FBI profilers are.
And I want to talk to you a little bit more about that, but going back to a little bit more about when you were a kid, what took up your daily life? Were you active in sports? Was school important to you?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I had 5 brothers and sisters, 2 brothers.
So a small family.
Yeah, small family, two brothers, 3 sisters. I was kind of in the middle. I was the middle boy, and, I was pretty active in sports. Track was my favorite, but I played a little soccer, a little baseball, but I was a pole vaulter, and that's really what I spent most of my time doing, and ended up setting the school record that stands today. It still hasn't been broken. I don't know, maybe they just don't have pole vaulters anymore, who knows? But it's still up on the wall in the gym there. So it was John S. Burke Catholic High School in Goshen, New York. And, that to me, I was like 5'2", 90 pounds when I started high school. I was the youngest kid in the class. I had skipped up a year. And, and when I told my track coach I wanted to pole vault, he just laughed. He was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, okay, you run your workouts. And if you want to pole vault after, go ahead." So that's what I would do. I would do whatever workouts I had to do for the day and then run over to the pits and pole vault with this guy, Mike Cronin, who, he was probably a year ahead of me. And he was just learning it himself, but he taught me and we just worked together until he graduated. And then, like I said, it became, I became the MVP my senior year, and I, got a college scholarship to track because of pole vaulting. So it really was a major success story in my life because I wasn't, big and, powerful. So it just didn't make sense that I'd be a pole vaulter because it takes a lot of upper body strength. But I developed it, and then, I worked hard at it, and I really liked it. So that's what I did. And, I did it for a couple of years. I did the track thing in college, and then my brother Tim and my brother Peter was in my class in Fordham, and Tim then joined us when he got into college, and my brother Tim and I started the Frisbee football team, the ultimate Frisbee team at Fordham. And what we did was we had a lot of friends who were on the basketball team. A couple of them were 7 feet tall. We brought them onto our Frisbee team. And so we would just have them run into the end zone and throw it way up in the air. And, it was Dude Tongal, who was 7'2", and Eddie Bona, who was 6'11". But Eddie could jump and get his head as high as the top of the backboard. He was just all legs. And they were both Sudanese. And, they were great guys, and they loved to have fun, and it was fun for them. So we really made a splash because, we were the only team who had 7 foot tall players. But, it was when Ultimate Frisbee was in its infancy. So it was a club thing, and it was so much more fun and free than the rigorous schedule that we had with track. And then, just the workout times and the travel and all that, it just got to be too much. So it was so much fun. And we were in amazing shape because you're always moving in that game. It's, it's like soccer. There's no timeouts. There's literally just, you're running for, like almost 2 hours. And that's a great thing.
So what year is it that you entered college?
77 to 81 was college. And then 81 to 85 was law school. I went to law school at night because I had to get a job to pay for it. And one of the jobs I got was security at the school. So I could actually study and get paid overnight. So I would take overnight shifts, which was crazy. And then I got a job in a law firm, which paid a little better. And then realized I don't want to work in a law firm. I loved criminal law and constitutional criminal law. And I thought, that's definitely what I want to do. So my plan was to get a job on the prosecution side and the defense side and see where I would, end up. And because I really wanted to help people, and, it seemed like the prosecution side is the right way to do it. But, I also think that sometimes people get a raw deal on the defense side. So I also wanted to prevent false convictions, So anyway, when I got the job at the prosecutor's office, I realized they had all the discretion. And so I literally told the defense attorneys, hey, if you got somebody who you think is actually innocent, bring him in, talk to me. And if they can convince me, I'll reduce or drop the charges, because I don't want to prosecute somebody who isn't guilty. And, so they knew, like, if they came to me with some crap bull story about, I didn't do it, but all the evidence was so solid against them, they were only going to be hurting themselves. So they rarely came to me, but a few times they did. And I listened and, had the cops do additional investigation. And sometimes I went out and actually followed up on things. And a couple of times I dropped charges against the defendant and pressed charges against somebody else.
Well, and that's one of the key things for anybody working in criminal prosecution is don't put the blinders on just simply because a case is focused on one person.
Right.
You'll always have to be open to new information and new suspects or new alibis, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And far too often when you hear those horrific stories of people who spent 25, 30 years in prison, you go back and you could have talked to that one person.
Yeah.
And they just didn't.
Well, a perfect example is the West Memphis Three case. This is the murder of 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. A tiny little town in the middle of nowhere. Why is it the only place in the history of the United States of America that 3 8-year-old boys are murdered at the same time? Why? Why there in this tiny little town? That thought, kept stirring in my head. They arrested 3 teenage boys. One of them had like lower than a 70 IQ. They got him because they said the other 2 said he did it. They got him to say the other 2 did it. And then he withdrew that statement, and they still used it in the other guy's trials. And they convicted all 3 of them. And one of them they put on death row. These were teenage boys because these were the weird ones. They were goth. They were into weird things. But they thought that this case was, a sadistic sacrifice kind of case because there were some injuries on the boys, that looked like torture and sexual activity. They were in water in a place called Turtle Creek. They were snapping turtles, and that was all artifact after the fact, and it was very clear. But these were small town cops who just lit up when they saw that and said, oh my God, these kids were tortured and it's, satanic sacrifice or something. Just ridiculousness. And the fact is that they locked these kids up they were in jail for like 17 years before, basically a groundswelling of support got the judge to withdraw that conviction. And instead of going to trial again, they took an Alford plea so that they could be released on that day. And one of the guys didn't want to do it at all, and he fought it, but if he didn't do it, the other 2 couldn't, so they all agreed to do it. So they pled guilty, professing their innocence, and they got let out. But that case is solvable if you actually test the DNA and do an investigation. But the DA there and the cops there are saying, hey, the case is solved. We had these pleas. That's it. That's all we need. That's just garbage. So anyway, that case is a perfect example of when they rushed to judgment because they thought they knew what they had, and they got, for example, they said that they had a knife that scraped these boys. 5 scrape marks, about, half inch apart. They said, obviously, they used a Rambo serrated knife to do this. Well, if you're going to use a Rambo knife, you don't scrape it across the chest of somebody. You stab them with it. And then you could tell the serrations by the edges of the cuts. The lacerations are going to show that. But if you have 5 claws on your hand and you're a snapping turtle and you're trying to get purchase, you might scrape across, and that's what it was. All of it was attributable to snapping turtles. So when they thought, this child sacrifice thing happened, they just went crazy and looked for the crazy guys, in the neighborhood. And that's a total mischaracterization of justice.
Going back a little bit, what brought you to wanting to be in an attorney and do law?
It's interesting because I was a chemistry major. I had dyslexia when I was a kid, so math and chemistry were easy, but reading and history and stuff like that were not. So I thought I was just dumb was always slow when I read because the words and the letters would all get mixed up. But then my brother, I think I was probably a freshman or sophomore in college when my brother was diagnosed with dyslexia. And that like just really made me feel like, wait a minute, I have exactly the same thing. And what do we got to do? So they gave us these exercises to do that, you're following trails through a maze with your eyes and you're doing things, exercising. And what you're trying to do is get your eyes to act better in a focused manner. And after a year of doing those exercises, I could read without a problem. And I read my first novel on my own, which was Dune, which I loved, because it had science and science fiction, but it was also sociology. And it's such a rich universe of characters. And then I read all the ones that Frank Herbert did, and then I went back and read all the ones that his son did afterwards. And I just think that's an amazing series, but that got me into writing. I always thought the people who could put all those words together in a book were amazing. I never thought I would ever want to do it, but I would later pursue that. But in the meantime, when I was in chemistry lab as a junior, they closed the graduate program at Fordham in chemistry. So they had these 3 doctoral students who were doing research, and they just picked out the top 3 people from chemistry and gave us labs, and we continued the research. I loved doing it. I was actually working on an anti-leukemic compound found in nature, but it was very difficult to separate, and I eventually figured out a way to do that. But I realized I'm spending all my time in this lab alone, and this is not fun. This is like, I don't think I could do this for 20 years, So I went to my father's office, who was a lawyer. He did medical malpractice and products liability law.
So that was your introduction into attorneys, was your father?
Yes. But, what I didn't know was when he said, well, you should think about going to law school. And I was like, I'm a chemistry major. Why should I go to law school? And he said, I was a chemistry major before I went to law school. I was like, what? I was shocked. He never said anything. And I just assumed that he was like pre-law and something. And he wasn't. And so, he told me the story of how he got from chemistry to law school, which was after college, he was playing semi-pro baseball, and he got recruited to go into the Pirates AAA farm team, but his brother got drafted into the military, and he was going to get sent overseas to the Korean War. His brother had just gotten married. So if my father enlisted, they would leave his brother here in the United States. So my father enlisted, took a 3-year stint in Korea, and the day he was flying back, his father was killed accidentally on a job site. He had a construction company. And a month later, his brother, who took over the company, was killed accidentally at the same site. And these mob union guys took over the company, and my father went to law school on the GI Bill to sue to get the company back. He filed a lawsuit at the end of his first year, eventually got the company back, but they had sold off all the assets. So it was pretty much worthless. So, having that family history and knowing about it, I think that not only drove me to law school, but also to criminal law. And, it's just something that I think me and my brother Tim didn't go to law school, but he became a cop and then an FBI agent, as well as I became an FBI agent. And I think that having that family history just kind of made us really want to pursue justice.
So from your time as a prosecutor, how long were you? So you started out in a traditional law firm, and then you decided you wanted to go the prosecutorial route.
So New York City is different than every other city in the country in that the city itself encompasses 5 counties. So each county has its own district attorney, but the city has its own prosecutors that can work in all 5 counties. It's called Corporation Counsel, New York City Law Department. And so I got a job with them as a prosecutor. I was prosecuting youthful offenders in family court. That's where, it's in the criminal court building. They have criminal and family court together. But then when, I got a job as a law clerk there, and then the day after I graduated from law school, I tried my first case. So I was right in the mix, and I did that for 3 more years.
Kind of really defines trial by fire.
It does. But, the fact is that I'd helped do the intake on these cases, and I did a lot of the interviews, because I was in law school and I was, almost done, and so they just used me, and so I was really up on what these cases were. The average caseload for all the prosecutors was about 200 cases. So they were happy to get another couple of people in. So me and Barbara McCardle, we both started at the same time, and we were both, in the Bronx, and we worked hundreds and hundreds of cases. It was insane, but we ended up both applying to the FBI at the same time, and we both got in. We were going through the FBI Academy at the same time. It was great, and she's amazing. Her husband was a sergeant in the NYPD. And she's tough as nails. She's about maybe 4 feet tall, maybe 4'3". I don't know. She's tiny, but she is so tough. It's amazing. And she's got this gravelly Irish Bronx accent. It's so cool. Anyway, so we went through the academy together, and, we worked our way through the FBI.
Now, what made you go federal as opposed to NYPD or staying at a local level?
Well, when I was a kid, I think I wanted to be a detective. I loved mystery stuff, and I read all the Hardy Boys and then Sherlock Holmes and all that. And I think what it was I didn't, after, you get a college degree and a law degree, you'd have to go back and become a street cop for years and then hope to become a detective, whereas I worked a case with the FBI, and the FBI agent said, well, FBI agents are just federal detectives. And it just was like a light bulb goes off. So I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good plan. So that's what I did.
Did the idea of potentially having to move either throughout the country or even internationally with some assignments have a concern to you, or were you kind of embracing that?
Well, it's interesting because at the time, it was so hard for them to fill positions in the New York office. People were quitting because they could not afford to live there from the FBI. They were saying, if you live in New York and you want to come and work out of New York, you can do it. So that was really an enticement, because I thought I would never want to live outside of New York City. But that's, kind of the way you feel when you live in New York City, right? But the fact is that when I started, I did the first 8.5 years in New York. But, when I got to Little Rock is a small, slow town, but I discovered Hot Springs Village in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which was a tiny little town, but it's also beautiful. Most of Arkansas is kind of flat and boring, but this part of Arkansas is really beautiful. And I was like, wow, this is kind of nice. When I retire, I think I want to come back here. And then, eventually being shipped to Washington, D.C., then Quantico, and traveling the entire country, I understood why people live outside of big cities. And I think now with COVID and sort of all this remote working, I think a lot of people are leaving the cities to populate these small towns where their life is a little less stressed. And, they don't have to worry about how many hours of traffic and trying to find parking spaces and competing with 10 million other people when you want to go do something. You can't simply say, okay, I want to go see that movie tonight, because, there's probably literally at least 1 million other people who want to see that movie, and there's only, 20,000 spots in the whole thing. So what are you going to do? So you have to really learn the ways to get around and wait on lines and skip the things that the tourists do, because you're never going to get through those. So there's all these complications when you live in a big city that, eventually you kind of want to kick back and relax a little more, I guess. So I was not afraid, because I was promised to be able to go back to New York. But in the end, the fact that they transferred me turned out to be a good thing.
So what year did you come on the FBI?
1987.
And you eventually made your way to the behavioral sciences unit, and we're going to get down there. Was
Right.
that your goal going in, or what were you what did you want to focus on?
Okay, it wasn't my goal going in until we had the behavioral science class, and Pete Smerick was the profiler who taught our class. Brilliant guy, charismatic as hell. He started out as a photographer in the FBI, and eventually became a profiler and used those skills, his knowledge of photography, in his profiling. And also, he taught us this case about James DeBard-Laban, who was a serial killer that was operating on the East Coast. And he said one time he's teaching this class to new agents, and a guy raises his hand in the back of the class and says, "I know that guy. He was dating the other FBI agent that lived on my floor. Serial killer who was killing dozens of women up and down the East Coast." He was a genius, this guy, but he got caught because the Secret Service identified and arrested him as a counterfeiter. And he was just doing that sort of on the side because he thought he could. And he did. He got away with it for a while, but then they were able to catch him, and they opened up a couple of storage facilities that he had rented out, and in one of them they found all these boxes of porn, and the agent gave it to Pete Smerick because he knew he was a photographer and stuff, and he said, this might be important to you guys. And Pete's looking at the pictures, and there's mostly Polaroid pictures, and he said, "This isn't acting, this is torture porn, and these women are really being tortured." And he realized that, he went and started looking at missing persons list and so forth, and he matched up a bunch of the women who were missing with having been in this torture porn with this guy. And so they realized that he was actually a serial killer, serial rapist and serial killer as well. And it's very possible, because I had a cousin who had hitchhiked to Washington with her best friend for a rally, some kind of big rally in Washington when we were kids, and she disappeared, and 2 weeks later they found their bodies. They had been tortured, and the case has been linked to him but not proven. But yeah, so he was a really bad guy, and Pete Smerick told us about this case, and immediately I was fascinated by it. So at the end of the class, I went up to him and I said, "Look, I want to do what you do." He's like, "Go get 10 years of experience working major cases, working with other cops, and then come back and talk to me." So like 9 years and 8 months later, I was in the unit. And at my retirement, Pete stood up and said, you know how many thousands of agents came up to me and said, "I want to do what you do. You're the only one who did come back to me in 10 years because you did everything I asked you to do, and you were motivated to do it." So I didn't know about profiling until I took that class, but once I took it, I was like, that's the best way to use your brain. It's like amazing to be able to, try to piece things together. And when you do, and you save somebody, it was nothing better. So,
was there one key component that he wanted you to focus on in gaining that experience that would make you a better?
Wasn't one key component. There was like 10. And, it's work violent crimes, work sexual crimes, work with local law enforcement, get task force experience, work major cases. It was a list of things and I kept in touch, and I bought a couple of cases down to them. When they came to me in New York, I said, we should bring them to the BAU. And I would call Pete up, and like I said, I just maintained good relationships with him and Ken Lanning and John Douglas and Robert Ressler and Roy Hazelwood. These were all my idols there, and then eventually I got to work with them.
So transitioning or starting to work towards your transition, how did Hollywood come to your radar? Did they come to you, or did you go seeking it out? Because you started doing consultation work before you retired.
Oh,
correct?
yeah. But even before that, in '94, I wrote my first screenplay, and it was basically about my story, about how I went from being a prosecutor to an FBI agent. And I sold it to CBS. The FBI said, you can't sell it. And I said,
It's my story.
But I said, have you read U.S. v. David Berkowitz? I mean, do you not understand that there's a Supreme Court in the United States that said that you can never limit a citizen's right to their First Amendment freedoms, including putting monetary restrictions on it? It has to apply to FBI agents too. And so I wrote this legal brief. And, a few months later, I got a call from the chief FBI counsel. And he said, yeah, you're right. And we're going to change the policy. So they let me sell it. But in the end, CBS ended up not making it. But, I knew that at some point I would pursue that again. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. What was it like to write a screenplay? How's that differ? Because we're going to get down to the fact that you've actually written a book, but how's writing a screenplay different?
Well, a screenplay, it's very technical, right? There's a lot of different parts, and unfortunately at the time I didn't have any software to do it. So now I have Final Draft. And so, as soon as you type in the first letters on the thing, it puts it as the title. And then it gives you a drop down for, are you talking about a scene heading, action, dialogue, all that stuff. It's all right there. Now, when I was doing it, I had to indent, I had to look at a screenplay and try to guess. But I know that the first time I wrote a screenplay, I had no idea really what the action and direction lines were meant to be and how to really write them in a concise manner. And when I think back to how goofy I was back then and how much I've learned since then, I mean, it's just overwhelming. But I was trying, and that's what happens. You make your first try. So I did it, and, when I would eventually start as a tech advisor on Criminal Minds, and I'll tell you that whole story if you want to hear it, but
please.
But when I started doing that and telling the writers and the showrunner stories about the FBI, about cases and so forth, and then like in season 2, I said, I want to try to write an episode. I had already learned a lot more from all the episodes that were written in the first season. Excuse me. I'd already learned a lot more from the episodes that were written in the first season. So when I wrote my first episode as a freelance writer for Criminal Minds, it was a lot better. I mean, I would say, just miles above what I've first written. But I still had things to learn, and Ed Bernero kind of shepherded me through that process. And, eventually I wrote like 14 episodes of Criminal Minds and became a full-time writer-producer on the show. So it was such a transformation. And now I can't tell you how many people send me their scripts and I give them notes, just like somebody gave me notes and said, you have to do this. This is how you introduce characters. You should never talk about thoughts in an action line. You have to make sure that the characters are conveying the information, because nobody's going to read those action lines when you actually shoot it. So anyway, a lot of little technical factors. But the way that I got involved with Criminal Minds was I was recovering from my bone marrow transplant, and I had lymphoma. I got it from being a first responder on 9/11, and a whole bunch of us. There were 8 FBI agents at the time with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and there were like 60 or 80 cops and firemen from New York City with it at the time, and now there's over 1,700 people who've gotten it, maybe even more. I think those figures were like 2013, but I was recovering from the transplant. I was in isolation, so that means my house was a clean environment. Nobody was allowed in my house for 6 months, and everything had been sanitized, and if I went out, I would wear gloves and a mask. Today, that's not weird, but back then it was. And I got a call from a friend of mine Chris Whitcomb, who was taking around this, actor, he said, who wanted to meet FBI profilers. But he said, isn't there anybody in the FBI with a personality? And so Chris called me, and I said, yeah, I'll meet him, but he can't come here, but I'll go meet you outside, but I'm going to have to wear a mask and gloves. So I went to this bagel place to meet them, and Mandy Patinkin walks up to me and shakes my hand, said, "Hi, I'm Mandy Patinkin." I said, "Of course you're Mandy Patinkin. Think I'm stupid, you know?" And he just laughed, and we sat down, and he said, "I like you already." And he goes, "Tell me your best case and your worst case." And that would be the foundation for my podcast, Best Case, Worst Case. But I said,
Stop jumping ahead.
I know, but I'm just telling you. And when he said that, I said, "Look, I'll tell you my best case, but my worst case is not for entertainment purposes. I'm not going to tell people about it." So, I told him about this kid, Davri Chen, who was abducted, and I, literally in the space of 5 hours, beyond all the statistics, I helped them rescue him alive 28 hours into this abduction. And that was, that kind of gets you through a lot of the ones where they never get solved or the kids are found, but they're dead. And so, you have to focus on those good wins. Otherwise, it just destroys you. But I told him that. He picked up his phone, he dialed, and he said, Mark Gordon, all right, I'll do the show, but you got to meet this guy, Jim Clemente. So they ended up basing his character on me, and I became a tech advisor. And then...
but you were still active?
I was still active, right. And I actually, wrote my first, at least one of the first 2 episodes while I was still an FBI agent. And I went through all the procedures and everything, and I actually won a Human Rights First Award for my first episode, which was about stopping the torture at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which is something else I did. So, writing was something that I always looked up to, and I never really thought I would be able to do it. But having gotten to the point where I did it, and I felt good at it, and I could actually make a career out of it, that was another huge turning point in my life, because after going through cancer and a bone marrow transplant and a massive heart attack as a result of the chemo and all this stuff and flatlining, I was arrested 3 times, which is not good. My doctor said, you got to do something less stressful. You can't keep doing this, because I was running around the country, in a very high stress situations, child abductions. So, writing seemed like a great thing to do. And so that's why I made that transition.
I'd like to take you back a little bit. Obviously 9/11. What was that day like for you?
Well, I was actually teaching at Quantico. I was teaching Train the Trainer. We were trying to kind of force multiply so we can get more people in the FBI to go out and train on sex crimes and stuff. And my sister paged me in the middle of this class a number of times, and then she literally paged me 911. And I was like, what's going on? And so I gave the class a break. I went to the video room, and I called her. And as I'm calling her, I look at, there's a monitor, and it's showing the World Trade Center on fire. And I was like, why are they showing 1993? What's going on? But I'm calling my sister, and I'm just seeing that. And when she gets on the phone, she's like, Jimmy, a plane hit the World Trade Center. Her husband is also Jim. And she said he was working across the street at One Financial Plaza. He was knocked out of his chair when it happened. That's how big the explosion was. And, what's going on? And I was like, I don't know. And I'm looking, and then the second plane hits. And I said, oh, this is an attack. But I knew that all the bomb techs are in the classroom next to me. They're here for an in-service. So I ran over there, knocked on the door, burst into the class, and everyone's like, what are you doing? And I said, we're under attack. Both World Trade Centers have been hit by jumbo jets. Because they were saying, a private plane just hit the second tower. I'm like, a private plane? The wings are as long as the side of that building. That's 200 feet long. And they all thought this was some kind of exercise as part of class. I said, no, I'm telling you, they're both burning. And then all their pages started going off. So what happened, though, was one active FBI agent who got killed that day, Lenny Hatton. He was the bomb tech who stayed behind in New York in case something happened. All the other bomb techs were in that room. Every one of them would have been at the site except for this class.
Wow.
So, they stopped planes flying, but United flew all the bomb techs up to New York. I got in my car and started driving. Of course, it took me a little longer to get there than they got there. It wasn't until 5 a.m. So I got there, went onto the pile, and we were all just digging with our hands. And we had these bucket brigades. And if you found pieces of human beings, you would call for an orange bucket, and then you would put it in there, and they would send it to the morgue. And, we were looking for anything. And I remember I found a ticket, like one of those flimsy, it was like red mimeograph tickets, right? Airplane ticket. So it was from somebody on the plane, and I found that survived that explosion. It was crazy. And, you would find it was just horrible.
How many days did you spend down there?
I was on the pile for 5 days, and then my assistant director called all of the agents from our unit to go to the Pentagon because some of the contractors were selling classified safes for the junk metal with all the documents in it. They were taking it from the site and just selling it. And so they fired all the contractors. So my unit and a few other units did all the demolition at the Pentagon after that because you had to have a
TS clearance?
Yeah, and above. So I was the only one who knew how to operate a skid steer. It had those jaws. You could actually pick up those safes. It took like 8 people to carry those safes, but I could do it with the jaws. And literally I was picking them up and then going to the edge of the building where the facade had fallen away and dropping them down into.
Where'd that random skill set come from?
My brother Tim, he was a natural born contractor, and he taught me. Like, it was weird. I mean, probably
this is going to come in handy one day.
No, but it's fun operating a skid steer, but you kind of feel like you get into one. I ended up buying one, because I had some acreage and I was always picking up trees and stuff that were falling down. But you feel like Sigourney Weaver in Aliens when she gets into that thing, that forklift kind of thing, because you literally this thing went up 14 feet high. It's got these massive hydraulics on the side and literally a jaw on the bucket that can pick up something and lift it up and almost throw it. That's how powerful it is. So anyway, yeah, so I had that skill, and so I was doing that. And, we were there for 3 weeks cleaning all of the classified stuff out and also looking for bodies, and there were some horrific things there too. But everybody in my unit was horrified by what happened at the Pentagon. But I said, the World Trade Center is 1,000 times worse than this. And they were like, come on. Well, it turns out it was, because there was like 1.2 billion tons of debris from the World Trade Center. Anywhere else on the planet, it would be an entire city in ruins. That complex is so huge. I mean, it's 9 square blocks. And, the 2 towers, each tower each floor is an acre of office space. So you have 220 acres smashed into dust. And you could see where it collapsed down all the way through to the parking garages underneath. It looked like there was no floor bigger than this. Like, 9 inches of debris. You could see it like a layer cake. 15 floors. Every person, every desk, every computer, every chair smashed to that size. It's just obliterated. And it was the worst thing I ever experienced in my life.
So you and I kind of share some similarities. You're half Italian, half Scotch-Irish, as I am. My mom was Scotch-Irish, my dad was Italian.
Oh, wow.
We're reversed in that you were born in California, went back to New York when you were 2 or 3?
Yeah, 3, I think.
I was the opposite. My mom was from California, kind of not necessarily the Bay Area, but that area. She went to New York, met my dad, had me, and then wanted to come back to California. So I left New York when I was 3, and I grew up in California. So just kind of the opposites.
Yeah.
But I remember we had a trip planned in October after 9/11, and it was like, yeah, we're still going. Because for me, I don't know what it is. There's something about New York City. It just feels like home, and it always has.
Right.
And I remember walking, just working our way from Midtown down, and just the the amount of debris that was still around, even then, a month later.
Right. Well, it's funny because I also went back and did a presentation at John Jay College in October of that year too. Like so I was working at the Pentagon, and we just got released in time for me to do that presentation. So I went up back to New York, and even then I could just still feel the morale in the city was just crushed. And even though people were very helpful, and when we would walk out of working on the pile, people were there handing out water, they were cheering and stuff like that. You had politicians come and visit, which was a joke. Rudy actually was great. Rudy was there rolling up his sleeves and, really trying to encourage people. I don't necessarily, like when politicians make, appearances at things like that, but he really seemed to be doing the right thing at that time, whereas a bunch of other people were just there for the photo op and then they left. But we were sleeping on the sidewalk, or, every now and then there would be a barge, like a food barge that would come in. And sometimes they had those red, bench seats. That was like so much better than the sidewalk. But, we were all just there until we dropped, and then we got a couple hours of sleep and got back up and just got back on the pile. It was just horrible.
Now, how soon when did you start having symptoms?
Well, I would say it was pretty quick because I fought them off for, I would say, to all of 2004, probably sometime into 2003, I was just exhausted. I was traveling a tremendous amount, and I finally, in, I don't know, May or June of 2004, told my boss, look, I don't know what's going on, but man, I'm not recovering from these trips. I got to slow down. He said, I've been trying to get you to slow down for 5 years.
But you just thought it was
I just thought it was
lag from just being
jet
traveling.
lag. Yeah, I was out so much, and I remember getting stuck on the runway in Chicago, and I think we had to get de-iced 5 times, because we'd get back on the runway, and then it would take so long that they said, you got to de-ice again, and so we were on there for like 8 hours, and I had never felt so exhausted in my life. And that's when the next day I told him, I was like, this is just getting too hard. Anyway, I went to the physician who does the physicals for the FBI, and I kept going to him, and they kept giving me like antibiotics and stuff, and nothing changed. And I started coughing when I was on the phone. Then it was when I was speaking, and then it was when I laid down, and nobody could find anything wrong with me. And I was very, I was more and more and more exhausted, and I literally started sleeping, sitting up in a chair in my living room. And then at some point, even that caused me to cough, and I would literally just pace around my house to try to, kill the time because I couldn't fall asleep. And I remember I literally saw a sign as I was driving home that said something chiropractic, something about holistic, medicine or something like that, And I just said, I feel terrible. My whole body aches, I'm going to go. And I start walking towards the place, and I see close sign on it. And I see a guy sitting there eating his lunch. And he looks at me, and he comes up and he flips the sign over and says, come in. And he said, you look like you're in pain. I said, I am. Can you help me? He said, yeah, unless you have a tumor. I said, what? I want to x-ray you. He x-rayed me. I had a tumor the size of a softball pushing on my throat here. No medical doctor saw that, right? So anyway, I I immediately called my doctor. I went home, called my doctor. I sat down in my chair waiting for him to call back, and I started coughing. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't catch my breath, and I couldn't breathe. So I called 911, but I couldn't speak. And then, this was at the time just when you would have three-way dialing came in on your home phone, and I dialed my sister. And she works at the hospital. She's a nurse. And she said, "That's my brother. This is his address." And she raced out, and they came out. And I remember laying in the back of the ambulance, and there was an old guy, ambulance guy, and there was a young girl, EMT, and he said, "Wow, you don't see that often." He's pointing at my throat. Basically, my Adam's apple was off to the left here because this tumor was growing like crazy. And, I didn't know what it was, what was going on. Now I know it was a tumor. Then I didn't know what was up. But, they said, they put me, I know my sister was running the ER at the time, and I know she wasn't looking very happy. So that wasn't really good for me. But I remember them saying, "I have lymphoma." And I said, and I'm thinking, lymphoma, okay, that's must
smokers.
Yeah, no, I didn't even know what it was, but I thought it meant, all right, my lymph nodes are growing really big or something. I didn't know what lymphoma was. And then all this stuff, and my other sister who worked at Sloan Kettering got me transferred to Johns Hopkins. And, best hospital in the country, one of the best in the world. So I'm going there. And because they said that the tumor I have is wrapped around nerves that control my vocal cords and may control my breathing. So they don't know what the hell they're going to do. That's the only thing I knew when I left to go there. And then I go into Johns Hopkins. They show me in my room. I go over to the bed. I pick up the folder there, and it says, "Welcome to the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center." I looked at my sister and said, "I have cancer? Like, why didn't somebody tell me?" I'm laughing now, but it was like
Kick in the gut.
Oh yeah. Just total shock. And then I was severely depressed, but that night, by midnight, they had typed the cancer and all that, and they started chemo at 12:05 a.m. That's how crazy it was. They shot me up with really high doses of steroids to shrink the swelling because it was going to choke me to death. And it went like in one day, it went from the size of an egg to the size of a softball, and they got it back down to the size of a baseball with the steroids. So anyway, the whole point was, I was pretty down about it. And then 3 days into it, well, I shouldn't skip forward yet, but remind me about 3 days into it. So at 8 a.m. when I finished the chemo, I'm just rolling over trying to, because it makes you feel sick. It's horrible. And I just roll over in the bed, and there's this knock on the door, and I look, and there's this like mountain of a man standing over my bed. "What's this?" And he said, "You're Jim Clemente." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "The director wants to see you." I'm like, "Dude, I'm a little indisposed now." And he's like, "No, he's coming here." And I was like, "What?" I just rolled over. And a little while later, the door opens, and there's a guy in a wheelchair, and it's the FBI director, and his leg is sticking straight out, and they bang it into the door, and it's like, ah. And he goes, "Don't get up." I'm certainly not going to. He just had his knee replaced that day at Hopkins. He heard that I was in the hospital, and he came, and he sat with me for a half hour, him and his wife, and talked to me about it. And he had gone through cancer, and, she was just great. And they told me to read Lance Armstrong's books, and yeah, it was just an amazing thing. And I have to admit, before that, I called him Cardboard Bob because he seemed so stiff. Whenever you met him and whenever he was doing anything publicly, very, straight arrow Marine, And after that, I realized, wow, he's such a nice guy, and, really stand-up guy. And he would come visit me at the FBI Academy when I was teaching. After that, great guy. So I told you to remind me about 3 days later, right? So, hold on a second. So, I'm laying in bed, and I realize I didn't get hit by a truck. I can fight this. This is not the end. I could have gone out to get the mail in the morning, and a cement truck ran me over. It would be it. So, fuck cancer, you know. And I started doing these like visualizations in my head, you know, of, you know, FBI and me and these spikes crushing small letter C cancer. Just doing that every day and thinking about that. And somebody had told me about how laughter actually improves your immune system. So I started watching Pink Panther and Monty Python movies every day, you know, and I decided I am not going to be mired in the darkness, and it really made all the difference in the world for me. And eventually, after 2 rounds of chemo, you know, they did the scan, and I knew it as soon as I saw the face of the guy who did the scan. And they came and gave me the results the next day and said, chemo's not working. We thought you were doing great, but you know, there was a 80% chance of survival before. Now it's 20. You're going to have an emergency bone marrow transplant. And that day, right after I got that news, I saw this woman sitting in a chair, and she looked like shit, you know, like she'd been going through hell. And I introduced myself and said, I hope you're all right. I just found out I have to have a bone marrow transplant. She got diagnosed with the same thing as me on the same day. Chemo failed, told she has to have a bone marrow transplant at Johns Hopkins. She was in Europe. I was in Virginia, and we end up having the transplant on the same day in Johns Hopkins. So we're like brother and sister. We were born, reborn, our second life. You know, they kill you. They give you 10 times the lethal dose of chemo. Once your blood counts go to 0, they give you transfusions to keep you alive, but that only works for a little while. But if you don't, you know, then they put the stem cells in. It was an experimental stem cell transplant, autologous. It was my own stem cells. And, you know, they take them out of you and they try to get the bad ones away, because I had blood cancer. So it's kind of, you know, you could be giving yourself back cancer.
Right.
But, you know, that's the risk you take. And so
how long does it take for them to harvest that?
Right. Well, to harvest it, it's just 4 or 5 hours. You know, you have a tube going into your aorta, and it's literally taking out your blood and taking out stem cells and then putting your blood back in. But it's a really weird, sick feeling, seeing all your blood going out, and it made me sick. But when they put them back in, they said, you know, within 24 days, we'll know if you're going to live or die. And, 11 days into it, I started making my own blood. But I did it. I think it happened so fast because me and Mary, the woman I met, we would knock on each other's doors, and with our masks on, we would roll our little stands around with our IVs, and we would walk a mile. They had 1 foot squares on the floor, 5,280 of them is a mile. We walked a mile every day. And, I think it really made the difference, because all your organs function when you're upright. Laying down. They used to think bed rest was a good thing. Bed rest does nothing positive for anybody. And you need to be up and moving in order for your body to function. Your muscles have to engage all your organs, and that's how you get rid of toxins. And especially when you're putting chemo in your body, you need that. So we had 2 rounds of regular chemo, 2 rounds of high, so that's 8 hours every 21 days. High dose was 5 days in a row of 8 hours every 21 days.
Oh, man.
And then the prep for the transplant, which was, we're going to kill you now, 8 days straight of 24 hours of chemo. And the name of the chemos are Cytoxan and Busulfan. I mean, Cytoxan, you got to know that is not good for you.
Yeah.
you know, but it's trying to kill the cancer before it kills you. That's what you're trying to do. And it was horrible. And, I wasted away. I was like 125 pounds at the time now. But we walked every day, and 11 days into it, I started making my own blood, and 12 days into it, she did. And so we got out of severe isolation at that point, and then we went into clean environments for a month, and then we had to, basically just stay away from people and germs for 6 months before our immune system would kind of start kicking in. And when it did, because there was no germs around, I picked up every allergy in the world. Because if you're, it's like a baby.
I was just going to say, it's almost kind of like being a baby again.
Oh, it absolutely. That's why I said we were reborn. Our new birth date, was November 11th, 2004. And so we are, our immune systems were literally like newborns. We had your lymph nodes store all the white blood cells that were effective in attacking any disease you had. So it stores one that looks like this, and then when it's trying to find it, and when it finds the one that fits, it says, all right, go make billions of these, and they'll all come in and attack everything. That's what it does. But when you have zero in there, there's nothing to attack. So everything that comes in, babies get fevers 104, 105, 106 because of that. They don't have that history, so their body has to build this fever to try to kill it, but that's not healthy for an adult to have that kind of fever. So you have to stay away from all germs. So it was really tough, but it's helped me a lot in COVID because I already have good skills at avoiding that. Anyway.
You're like a pro at it already.
Yeah, and wearing masks is not a problem for me.
So November 2004, when did you get back to full duty?
So, so I guess it was, May of 2005 that I came back to the FBI full time, but I was very weak, and I was also kind of lost that clinical detachment that you get when you're working these cases all the time. And I felt really viscerally everything that when we started doing the first case, everything that was happening to the victims, I was just like, look, I can't do this right now. So I taught at the FBI Academy for 6 months and then came back full time at the BAU.
And when you got to the point where it was like, hey, just all of this is just too much, and it was time to shut it down, that was when?
Well, I didn't want to retire disabled. I didn't want to go off on a medical disability because I feel like, whenever the doctors came in to talk to me, I would get up out of bed and look at them eye to eye. I don't want to be the victim, the patient laying down there. I want to be active in this, and that's kind of how I felt about it. I didn't want to just, go away as a, injured person. I wanted to finish my career. So 5 years later, I was, going to hit my eligibility for retirement. And I said, if I can make it to there, then I'll retire then. And it's a good thing I did because 10 months later, I had a massive heart attack. But it was because the chemo had scarred my heart and calcified my coronary arteries. And, even though I was in great shape, I had a widowmaker heart attack. And if my brother hadn't happened by and said, what are you still doing here? I would be dead on the side of the tennis place where we were playing because I was just getting my car to leave and it was too hot. I rolled down the window, sat in the shade, waited for it to cool off, and 10 minutes later, I was on a table in the ER under cardiac arrest, and they took them a long time. So, but I bounced back pretty quick. I threw a pizza party for the nurses in the ER, and I took the doctor out to lunch, and he said, man, it's really amazing sitting here talking to you. And I said, I feel the same way. He goes, I don't think you understand. I could have called you dead at 28 minutes. I said, what do you mean? He goes, after 28 minutes of working on you, not getting your heart back into rhythm, I can officially call you dead. But I worked on you longer because you fought me so much in the middle. At the beginning, I knew you were strong. And I said, what do you mean? Why did I fight you? He goes, I don't know, when I was intubating you. And I said, okay, if you were using an adult tube, the problem is my trachea looks like this now because I had a tumor there when I had lymphoma, you know. And he said, yeah, you know. And I said, well, you were probably cutting into me, and that's why I was fighting you. And he said, well, then cancer saved your life because I worked on you for an hour and 3 minutes before I got you going. Look at you. And within 5 days, my heart was back to the highest level of heart function. Like my doctor said, you have no physical indication that you just had a massive heart attack. I have some electrical impulse issues, with my heart, which can be, dangerous. But
is that a byproduct of the cancer?
No, that is from the heart attack. Yeah, but they couldn't ever really pin it down. They were trying to put in a pacemaker, and I really didn't want them to, but they might have to do it at some point. But anyway, the point is, I'm still here, and 17 going on 18 years this November, right? And then I guess 12 years from how many years from my heart attack? It'd be 12 years from my heart attack. Yeah.
So what year did you actually retire?
2009, the end of it.
How'd you find that? Well, did you have your job as an advisor lined up, and was that going to be a full-time profession for you?
I was tech advising, and I intended to keep doing that. I also was a freelance writer, and I intended to keep doing that. I had no idea that I would actually be able to, or they'd want me to be a full-time writer and producer on the show. I think, people who are on the show, it's a very successful network show, a lot of competition to get into that show, but people, they do it, they have a certain way to work their way up and get onto a show like that. And I certainly was doing this in a way that wasn't characteristic, but I think they realized, my worth and my ability to give them, stories and help keep them real and actually make the episodes like learning occasions rather than just crap that somebody rehashed from another show. And they asked me to come on, and what it was 2 weeks after I retired, I went to shoot another episode that I wrote, and I never came back. So
my follow-up question to that was, when it came time to actually retire, were you okay with it, or did you have any struggles with having to give up that side of your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, They were just adding a whole new layer of new regulations into the FBI. We had to study, we had to take these classes, and then we had to take tests and
your favorite thing, homework.
Right. But I remember when I joined the FBI, the old guys, the old guard would complain to me about, the FBI is not what it used to be, and we have to do all these things. And I realized, every generation is going to have the same thing. So the administrative side, I don't miss at all, right? But when something happens and you could help, and you're like, oh yeah, I don't work there anymore, that kind of thing. Or somebody calls you and says, oh, I need your help, and you're like, I don't work there anymore, but I can refer you. So not being involved when you think you can add to the mix, that was hard. But at the same time, I realized, and this was a critical moment in the decision, when I wrote the first scene for the FBI, the first scene for Criminal Minds that I wrote, it was about child abduction. So Dr. Reed, who's our little genius on the show, would kind of be in the middle of a scene, and then he'd walk into like a green screen, and it'd be out in wherever he's talking about. So it was a child abduction case, and he walks into this green screen. He says, children who are abducted and killed, 44% are killed in the first hour. These 10 kids playing on this playground, and then half of them disappear. And then he said 73% in the first 3 hours, and 3/4 of them are gone. And then he says 99% in the first 24 hours. And there's one girl swinging on a swing. And she disappears, and the swing is swinging empty. And it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And I realized 1 minute, 18 million people learn those stats. I've been teaching around the country and around the world. I've taught 60,000 cops and related professionals in 12 years. 1 minute, 18 million people. How can you do better than that? So I realized this vehicle, because it exists, I really should be doing this because I can train and teach and educate so many people while they're being entertained. So that is why I decided to do it. I didn't know how I would do it or if it would work, but I started developing shows and selling pilots and things like that. And after I wrote that first episode of Criminal Minds, the FBI actually reached out to me and asked me if I would write a story about the FBI for them, if I would do it. And so I was the first FBI agent ever to be paid to write a script for Hollywood. And I did it with my brother, Tim. We wrote Washington Field. We sold it to CBS. They made the pilot, but then it was on a head-to-head competition with NCIS LA. Because that was already an embedded pilot, that was for a series that was already going, and they loved Shane Brennan. They said, we're going to give it to him. So that show got made, and Washington Field did not get made. But they hired my brother on as their tech advisor, and I went to Criminal Minds.
So for somebody who's interested in getting into that profession, advising, doing, script writing, what would be your advice for them?
All right, 2 things. Read Sid Field, Save the Cat. That's the most basic, simple way to learn about what you're supposed to be doing when you're writing a screenplay. And there's a lot of other things, and there's things like Writer's Boot Camp, if you want to spend some time actually doing it. But you should read Sid Field, and you can download online thousands and thousands of successful scripts, and you should read the scripts, and you can see how some are really dense with all this writing and stuff. Aaron Sorkin, you don't want to follow him. You don't, because he's an anomaly. He's brilliant, but he writes way too much. You will never sell a script if it looks like his. But if you look at some of the ones that are very clean and clear and simple, but they convey not only the story and the plot, but emotion, those are the ones you want to read and follow. And then, so you have to read and you have to write. And you have to get something like Final Draft. It's used in all of Hollywood to write script. It's formatting. It's easy to learn. It's, a couple $100 maybe, but it's an investment that will save you thousands of hours in time in turning what your thoughts are into a script. And what you have to do is, my brother and I formed the company XG Productions, literally as a hub for people in 3-letter agencies and police departments and the military who've lived extraordinary lives, who want to tell their stories and not be taken advantage of. Because Tim and I we were giving out these stories. We didn't realize we're getting paid pennies, and they're making millions of dollars a week on the stories we give them. Wait a minute. We lived this life. Why are we getting paid pennies? And so we represent 30 people who've retired, who are telling extraordinary stories and developing those. It's still a tough marketplace, but the average production company will knock on your door, say, hey, did you work this case? Wow, that's great. We want to do this show. We're going to pay you $2,000 or $5,000. Well, they're making $5,000 a minute, and your story is the basis of their case. Why are you giving it to them? This is your life story. You should be protected, and you should slice up your life story in 20 pieces. They'll tell you have to sell your whole life story, but you don't. Jim Fitzgerald, he's written 4 books. And they're big books, multiple chapters in each one. We took one chapter of one book And that's the life rights we gave them when we did Manhunt Unabomber. So that he would still be able to do 20 other movies or shows if he wants to. And you have to be smart about this. So we created XG as a hub for people who want to tell extraordinary stories that they lived so that they don't get taken advantage of. And depending on how much you want to get involved, do you want to write? Then, all right, we'll let you try. We'll try to shepherd you along the way. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's years of work, but if that's what you want to do. But right now, writing a book is a few year long process. You can do a podcast in 4 to 6 months and still create and lock in that IP. And it's a great new tool that anybody can use. So we've done probably 13 or 14 of them already, documentary series on Audible, and we're using them then to sell scripted and non-scripted TV or movies based on that same project. So it's one way to get your feet in. Certainly the budgets are minuscule compared to TV and movies, but it's a start, and that can then develop if people like your story. I mean, we have Evil Has a Name, a bestseller on Audible, and it's about the Golden State Killer case. Call Me God, bestseller on Audible. It's about the DC sniper case, and we sold shows based on those so that we locked in the IP, and we make the cops or the firemen or the military people, we make them producers on their own story. So they have some control over it, and also they get paid for it. Because this whole model here in Hollywood is, it's so take advantage of. It's like, I have an idea, I'm a producer, I have an idea, yeah, I want to do this case I heard about, oh, it's amazing, yeah, da, da, da. Okay, great. Yeah, sold. You got it. Now they're going to go look for people who they can exploit. Oh, yeah, can you, every week in the agents magazine, the retired agents newsletter, there's a list of producers who are looking for people. Do you know anything about this case? I always tell them, don't call them. What the hell do you want to give away that for? And, and they will exploit you. They will. I don't know another company who brings people in as producers. Look, if you were an FBI agent, you got something on the ball. If you're a federal agent, if you're a cop, if you're a detective, you already live the story. You know how to tell a story. You're not just a friggin' resource for somebody else. So we're trying to change the game in that. It's tough. It's a uphill battle because there's so many hundreds of people who fall victim to it every year. But we're putting the message out, you don't need to do that. Lock in your IP, register it with the WGA, go online and pay $20 to register your story so that nobody could ever take it away from you. And then develop it, the more work you put in on it, the more purchase you have. If somebody wants to write a pilot about your story, right? And you're telling them your whole life story and you're telling them all these things and you're helping them with accuracy and stuff, you should be a co-creator on the show. You should get story by credit, which the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, then gives you co-created by credit. But there's been so many times where I've told people my story and they write a script and say, oh no, I'm doing it. It's mine. I wrote the story. I was like, no, it's my life story. I lived the story. So that's literally what they try to do, and it's wrong.
You mentioned not to follow Aaron Sorkin's.
Well, what I'm saying,
all I was going to say is, for somebody who's trying to come to this from the first responder military, is there a successful screenwriter that comes from that background that you would recommend?
Yeah. Hey,
go look at this person's.
Well, there's lots of them. Ed Bernero's scripts are very clean. Erica Messer's scripts for Criminal Minds, just on Criminal Minds TV show. Those are really, really, they're very clean, simple writers. Look at them. You'll see there's emotion and plot and story and intensity, but it's all very simple and clean. I'm not saying Aaron Sorkin's an amazing writer. You should watch his masterclass. You should learn from his masterclass, but you shouldn't write scripts in the way he does because he's given a buy. He's the one that can write.
He's earned that.
Yes, he can write a monologue that's 3 pages long, which if you did that, if you tried to turn that script in as a sample, they would literally laugh at you and throw it away. They would never be able to do it. So if you want to get involved in this, one of the best ways to do it is to sit down and start writing. You have to, they always say, in order to succeed, you have to be open to failure. You have to try it. And some people are going to be good and some people are going to be bad. I had a couple who came to me and said, oh, we wrote this crime story that we want you to read it. Really excited about it. And I read it and I said, look, you have no idea at all about investigations. There is nothing in here. There's not even 2 sentences in a row that a detective would actually say or do or want to read for that matter. And I said, what do you actually know? What is it that you know? I'm in fashion, I'm in insurance. That's what you should write about. If you write about what you know, you're not going to look like a fool. And nobody wants to learn from a fashion person how to do an investigation. I'm sorry. If you get somebody who can spend the time with you and develop the story and actually create an investigative trail, a pathway, fine. But if you're going to try to do it together, look, I'm just being honest. I'm not going to lie to you. It would take so much work. I would be starting from scratch.
On the flip side, you're like, hey, I could take 2 former investigators. They're not going to be able to write a screenplay about fashion and have it sound correct.
No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't know anything about it unless somebody's murdered at the fashion thing. Then they're all right? So you just have to, stay within your lanes. I mean, people like to do research and write about other things, but typically they'll get a tech advisor and so forth. But to me, that's exploiting the tech advisor if you're not giving credit. If they're really participating in the process and you're not giving them credit, that's just wrong.
So you mentioned before that you've started a podcast. What's your not big advice? Is it more beneficial for somebody who's looking to start going down this pathway to maybe start talking about it on a podcast format first?
Yeah, I've started 3 podcasts. I did Locked Up Abroad, Best Case, Worst Case, and Real Crime Profile. Locked Up Abroad is like 20 episodes out there, but Best Case, Worst Case has close to 400, and Real Crime Profile has close to 600 episodes out. I've been doing this for 6.5 years now. Absolutely, podcasting is the most inexpensive, the most potentially far-reaching. You can literally talk to people around the world. We have listeners around the globe. We were like the number 2 podcast in Greece for some reason. In the UK we're big, in Australia, New Zealand we're big. The thing is that your reach is just exponential. If you tried to do the same thing with video, the cost and then the distribution is so much higher. But audio, not only does it engage people's imaginations, because we're not feeding them all that CGI that overwhelm you, it's an intimate conversation. You're in their ears, and people become more connected. I mean, you walk over to CrimeCon, you're going to see that. I mean, I walk down the aisle and 100 people. Oh, Jim, I heard you. I listened to all your stuff. Oh, they feel a connection to you because you're right there, and they love it. So many people told me, I love it when you go off, when you yell at someone, when you get pissed off. And I was like, yeah, I love it when you argue with Francie and do this. Yeah, well, because they feel like they're in our inner circle, and it's a great thing. I love it. It's the most fun thing I do is these audio projects. And I just finished writing my first scripted audio drama. It's called Bluebeard, and it's about the very first serial killer in L.A. And it's a 9-episode series, and we're just starting production on it. And it was the most difficult and intense writing I've ever done, because you don't realize when you write how much you write to your visual senses. And to have to transform all that into audio. You have nothing but audio and sound effects and music to convey exactly the same thing. You're in 20 different locations. You have 40 different people. How do we keep track of all that? How? And it's a really, really difficult process, but it's a challenge that I loved, and I want to do more. But hopefully it'll be out early next year. and hopefully we have a couple of stars lined up to play the roles of it, and you might even hear me a little bit. Who knows? But I always like to do a cameo in my things I write. So, but that's fun. So,
And it's purely audio based.
yeah, it's audio. It's like an old radio play.
I was just in my mind. I'm thinking the stories back to when Orson Welles read War of the Worlds.
Exactly.
You know, and at that time, people were drawn to just listening to the radio because there was no TV.
And people are drawn back to it now because there's so much horrible stuff on TV, and there's overwhelming sensory information. When I don't like these movies. Superhero movies are great. They're very popular, but it's not real, and I know it's not real, and I don't want to see not real stuff. I want to engage in it, and I love stuff that's tied to reality. I don't, yes, there's escape stuff, but I feel like CGI just overwhelms your senses, and you don't ever get to use your own imagination anymore. But with audio, you do, and I think that not only is it a great skill to develop for a writer, but it's why podcasts have blown up. When I started Real Crime Profile, there was a few, maybe 3 crime podcasts, and now there's 30,000 easily.
What's your recommendation for somebody who's thinking, okay, maybe I want to do a podcast? Do you recommend doing it as a solo and just tell the story, or do you recommend having 2 people working off of each other?
My recommendation is that it's better to have a conversation than to lecture at people. I just think the personalities are really what comes down to being more important than even what the story is that you're telling. My 2 main podcasts, Best Case, Worst Case, and Real Crime Profile. Best Case, Worst Case, me and Francie Hakes, we're like brother and sister. We poke the bear a lot and, get in each other's faces and things. But in the end, we totally love each other and we have fun. And people love that, being inside that. And Real Crime Profile, it's me and Laura Richards and Lisa Zambetti. And, it's a serious look at what you see in the media or cases on TV and real life cases. And we focus on the victims of crime, and we try to tell you what really went on behind the scenes. We started with Making a Murderer because what was in the documentary series was not the whole story. And people needed to know the whole story, about Steve Avery and about his nephew and, what really happened and what's really going on here. And you can't rely just on one documentary to get that. So we try to dive deeper into it and give you, our analysis, our behavioral analysis of the cases. So it's something that if you want to start a podcast, you can start it very easily. Zoom helps you. You can go around the world and interview people on Zoom and use the audio or post the video too if you want. But the fact is that it's the most inexpensive way to reach a huge number of people. The thing is, what you should probably do is record a number of them and edit them very well and introduce them as a group of, 5 or 10 and then drop one every week. Always on podcasts are much more popular. People will subscribe to them and then keep going. So it's the kind of thing where your launch, though, is very important. If you launch way down here, it's very difficult to reach this audience way up there. And sometimes there's a relaunch, with a new platform or whatever, and you have 100 episodes, that can change everything, because people love to binge. And, because they're getting to continue the story and learn about you and you as a character. And I would really suggest, especially people in law enforcement who tend to sort of talk as if they are on the stand, and it doesn't really engage people as well. So, show some emotion, be a character in your own podcast, and let people get to know who you are. And I believe you're going to engage many more people. People are going to want to listen to you.
My one gratuitous question. What was your opinion of the Netflix series Mindhunter?
I loved it. The most amazing casting I've ever seen. You know, Kemper, the guy who played Kemper, unbelievable. It just, he captured the essence of being this massive guy who was seriously bad, but who could literally never raise his voice, but scare the heck out of you just by saying words. And, you know, the guy who played the young agent in that, who was kind of based on John Douglas, you know, they dramatized that whole situation, but they found John Douglas on the floor of a motel room. He had been laying there for 2 or 3 days. I mean, he was very near dead. And, you know, he drove himself into the ground health-wise. And part of it was this whole thing. I mean, he was running around the country doing interviews with people like Kemper. And these are scary dudes. You know, somebody, I don't know if you want me to get as graphic as that case got, but what he did to his mother and, you know, and then burying her head in the yard, looking up at him so that he could always know that she would have to look at him. You know, sick dude, scary dude. But I love the series because they were very hyper accurate about these real life offenders who they depicted in it. You know, there was a lot of dramatization of the characters in the FBI and what happened and didn't happen there. But, you know, because you always want conflict drives drama. That's something that if I'm talking to the writers out there or potential writers, conflict drives drama. You have to have conflict. You can't say, oh yeah, and they decided to form this unit and everything was great and they did all this great stuff and it's great. You have to have a foil. You have to have somebody who's going to cause problems. You have to have bad guys and good guys and conflict and crashing heads and things like that. But so there's intention, what you intend, what your characters intend to do, and the obstacles they run into. Those are the key components of any drama. So the higher the intention and the greater the obstacle, the more dramatic your movie, play, whatever you're writing is going to be. So those are things you learn when you work in Hollywood for how many years now? Good Lord, a lot, like 20 years.
If somebody's got questions, can they reach out to you?
Yeah.
What's the best way to get a hold of you?
You know, JimClemente.com, Jim Clemente at xgproductions.com. That's probably the best way. And, you know, I think actually, sorry, I just gave you the wrong one. It's J Clemente at xgproductions with an S.com. That's my email.
I appreciate your time, sir.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.